Hello students, this is Professor Del Russo and I'd like to clarify Learning Project 4 a little bit. I know that some students have had some concerns about what exactly they have to do. Now there are some very detailed directions there, but I'm going to attempt to clarify them even more. I think the first two sections of your assignment you understand well. I mean, you need to identify misleading, leading, or forced choice questions, and I even made that more detailed by giving you examples of those questions, although they were among your readings and the lectures. And any areas where you might find problematic questions, anything you might find. And lastly, and the part that might be giving students some difficulty, is applying the reliability analysis that the Supreme Court in Idaho versus Wright and State versus Delgado offer us. Now, both of those cases address issues in interviewing children, forensic interviewing of children. Idaho versus Wright in part established that the out-of-court statements of children, that is hearsay, might be admissible under certain circumstances and not violate the Constitution. Now that's the fancy legal issue that is involved in that case. What I'm concerned about in Idaho versus Wright and the New Jersey State versus Delgado is the things that the court tells us to look for in determining whether children's statements that are made to teachers and forensic interviewers and aunts and moms and cousins, out-of-court statements that kids make about sexual abuse. Both courts take a look at those kinds of statements and say, here's what you need to look for to determine whether those statements are reliable or not. So when a kid tells the guidance counselor all about how Uncle Manuel is touching her on her body, or where some little boy tells the coach of the baseball team how the assistant coach of the basketball team, Giuseppe, was molesting him after the games, when those kinds of statements are made, we need to dissect them, analyze them, and look at a number of factors to determine whether they are reliable, whether they make sense, whether they are trustworthy. And if they are, certain things might happen. A jury might be persuaded, for example. A prosecutor or a DAG might be persuaded to follow up and file charges. Those are the kinds of things that Wright and Delgado was thinking about. And the most important issue is, should that come in despite the rule against hearsay? At least that's what was the concern of the Idaho versus Wright court. So to recap, what I want you to do is look at the interview as you would any statement under the Idaho versus Wright and State versus Delgado opinions. You are told to look at a statement and size up and persuade the court that the kid's assertions, what they say, are reliable or trustworthy. So how do you do that? You use reliability analysis tools. And I didn't even make you look for them and write them down from Idaho versus Wright and State versus Delgado. I gave you a PDF that lists them for you. It's called The Factors Indicating Reliability of Children. And it's a list of bullet points. Look to spontaneity and consistent repetition. Was there a prior interview by someone else? What was the mental state of the child like? Did they use age-inappropriate terminology? Did they use age-appropriate terminology? And so on. So, you have a hour-long interview that you're going to watch. There's a video clip you're going to look at in Learning Project 4. You're going to present to me your arguments using the reliability factors why this child's statement is trustworthy. And remember, the first two aspects of this assignment ask you to look at the interview style, their technique, the words they use. Is the interviewer asking bad questions? If they're asking questions that were said better differently, if they're asking questions that could have been asked in a better way, you ought to identify them. Did they ask a misleading question? Did they ask a leading question? Did they ask a forced choice question? So you're looking at the interviewer's question types and how they did in the interview. But you're also asked in this last part, involving the court analysis, to size up the credibility of that disclosure. Was the child's mental state appropriate? Did they use age-appropriate terminology? Was there consistency within the interview? In other words, if in the beginning of the interview that child said that her grandmother came down yelling at her and she got scared, if later on she is describing something about that same situation, does she describe it similarly? For example, yeah, when I was downstairs and my grandmother was yelling at me, I also ran into the bedroom. So later on in the same interview, she may be consistent. Is the child consistent throughout the interview? Is their gestures, are the gestures consistent with someone who may have been abused? Is their affect, their demeanor consistent with someone who is telling the truth? Or are they avoiding the interviewer's gaze? Are they being evasive in the way they respond? Are they repeating the question? Do they offer idiosyncratic detail? Do they talk about the smell of human sexuality? How things tasted? How it felt on their body? What semen looked like? These oddball sexual details that only someone who was involved in human sexuality would know about. Do they make a statement against interest? And when I say they, is the child in the video someone who made a statement against interest? And that means, did she say, am I going to get in trouble for this? Or I don't want my grandma to find out because she might give me a whooping. You know, if a kid says something like that, then it is more likely that the disclosure that they're making to, in this case, Giselle, the interviewer, is true, right? Because why would somebody make up something that's against their own interest? Why would they fabricate something that's going to get them in trouble? They simply would say nothing at all. So when kids make statements against their own interest, like, am I in trouble? Or my grandmother's going to whoop me? Or I'm going to get kicked out of school for saying this, I know it. If they were lying, they wouldn't make that statement if that was their state of mind. So that's something the court tells us to look at. Is there any motive to fabricate? Does the child correct the interviewer or even disagree? No, I never said that grandma was screaming at the top of her lungs. I just said she was yelling. If the child corrects the interviewer, that's powerful. That shows that they're paying attention, that they're not being misled or agreeing with whatever the interviewer says. Okay? So those statements have to be evaluated for credibility, for trustworthiness. And the way that children's statements are evaluated for reliability is to use the Idaho versus Wright and the state versus Delgado reliability factors. And I gave them to you. And I haven't gone through all of them, but when you watch the video on your own, write down what it is that's persuasive to you. Write down what you would say if you were arguing to your supervisor or to the court, to the judge or the DAG. Write down and offer those things that make this child's statement believable. Even things that aren't on this list. There may be things in the way that the child expresses herself, or the way that she uses language, or the way that she looks at the interviewer or behaves, that are satisfying to you, that make you feel this is true. Articulate them. Say what they are. Okay? Anyway, I know I was a little redundant here, but I hope I've emphasized what it is that you need to do. Good luck.